Hi, good evening, guys. Um, yeah, thought I'd continue talking about the Huns and our history and Attila the Hun culture, something like that to start off with, and the Scythians, and we'll see how the conversation goes. Just been outside after work, cutting the lawn, so I've been a bit tired. So see how my memory goes. Um, yeah, so over the last 70 years, when the communism came in, there's a lot of the historians have issues teaching the Attila culture, and there's a lot of deviation to the original teachings now. Because, for example, I'll give you an idea of something that maybe people don't really think about. One of our professors, Dr. Buckley Cornell, brought this to our attention once, one of his lectures, because he was born, I think, well, he's 80. What is he now? 80, early 80s. So he would have been born, 30s. So he got educated under he grew up. His career mainly started when around the 50s. So um, we had to start teaching history under a communism regime. So he gave us a idea how tough it was because, for example, during the Nuremberg trials, they had a 3,000, the for war crimes. They had 3,000 people show up at the crimes, and they executed 12 out of those. In Japan, there was 1,260 people, soldiers during the war crimes, and 6 people were executed. For Hungary, for example, between 1945 and 1956, 24,000 had to show up to the courts, and 2,700 were killed, and 606 for war crimes. So, yeah, under Stalin, it was very different. The fear, they knew that their tactics are totally to remove, re-educate, re-indoctrinate everyone very quickly. And they're the masters at informing, and they're the most bloodthirsty of all. And even under Tito, a lot of people think Tito. They even made movies about the partisans and how cool. But even between 1944 and 45, around 40,000 Hungarians were executed in the Bachka massacre, where the citizens, these are not normal citizens, were rounded up, mass graves, and shot into pits. So yeah, that's outside of Hungary. I hate to see the statistics of Romania, because and Ukraine and Slovakia, what they did to the Hungarians. Even the citizens who and Hungary didn't start World War II, and we had a lot of bloodshed. So yeah, so that paints a rough picture of what the fear people would have been living under, especially you imagine teaching history. You would have to be very careful how you teach it. So yeah, he kind of put a highlight how even sometimes had to mix to keep the commies kind of content some trash into it. So and then in between the lines, they couldn't get away with everything. So well, it depends because they had the lefty, most of the lefties there, and then later after 1989 when the fall of communism, Hungary, well it was 1991 actually, because the commies stayed another 2 years to make sure everything was proper before they actually left the country. But even then, a lot of the ex-pollies and their kids remained in power, and even then it didn't automatically change. Even now, he claims that 10%. No, sorry, there's three categories of lecturers: the lefties, there's the conservatives and the like national conservatives, and the lefties and the conservatives control. And national conservatives, a lot of them have to teach outside university, will still be very careful. But he says they can get away with a lot more now talking. And even the Attila culture has not been even Attila, they can't, part of the school curriculum, they don't teach it, as if it doesn't even belong in Hungary anymore. But I remember going to Parliament House, and taking us through the corridors. It's absolutely beautiful. And on the ceiling, they got all the pictures of the different leaders and of the Hungarian governors, governing and kings. And there's a beautiful ceiling painting where they have like Harpad. He was the first guy that came in to the Carpathian Basin with the Magyars and united the Hun tribe, the Magyar tribes with the Avars. Then they got, as I said, they got collection pictures. And in one corner they have Attila and Buddha. And both of them, they even got their little names underneath it so you can recognise who they are. And I remember the tour guide, because I knew the history. Luckily, back then I was still, because those lectures I went to about probably around 2011 and 12. So yeah, I had to refresh my memory because there's so many dates and names of people that I haven't got much of a photographic memory. Some people do, but anyway, and yeah, it's up in the Parliament House. And I remember asking, because I went with because one of my friends was from Australia, so we went to the English speaking tour guide, and I asked him, how come what's because back then it was very popular that mainstream school didn't teach Attila was Hungarian or part of our ancestry. And I said, it's interesting how, the building was built back in the 19th century. So I said to the tour guide, it's interesting how today the Hungarian culture doesn't or teach that Attila belonged to our ancestors or part of our history. Then why would they put it on a ceiling? And the girl was just dumbfounded. She didn't know how to answer. Or back then she acted like back then they didn't know our history. And I just made it feel very awkward. And then I even remember a few people coming up to me afterwards asking, oh, that's interesting, what do you know about it? So at the time, I think 3 or 4 people, they were Americans. And I was telling them, how you might think we're still living, people think they were living under freedom, but if people control your history, that means you're not living under freedom, because knowing your past, objective past, is what makes you and your nation understand or your purpose, and it gives you direction. But if they keep telling you that you're not who you are and you're nothing but weak, and they talk of all the battles that you lost, things like that, then it makes you feel inferior. I'm not talking about being prideful. It's about just being objective about what happened. And history should never be, even Dr. Bokoy and all the other professors who talk history, should always be objective. You have to, and it was always supposed to be taught like that, with the good and bad stuff. So, and that's all history is supposed to be taught as. But yeah, so that was interesting experience. So yeah, so I thought I'd talk about Attila because there's a lot of disinformation about him. And in Byzance, well, that's Eastern East Rome back at the time in the fourth century, sorry, around 353, 343. I told you I've had a bit tired from working outside for 3 hours mowing the lawn, so I'll see if I can remember the dates properly. That's when they start having accurate, like written records of Attila, where in Byzance, Priscus writes about Attila and his experience, because he actually visited the Hun Empire and visited Attila's court. And he's got a description, and he wrote 8 volumes of at the time of the period of and the Hun experience remained, and even Jordanus, 100 years later, he picked up a lot of Priscus's writing and reinforced it in his writing. So they're good sources, and they're read by the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Rome, and there's also other sources like the Goths write about the Huns, but they were pretty much the enemies of Huns, so they're the ones who make up a lot of fable about it, and yeah, just to spread disinformation. Yeah, so let me see, where do I start? The first writings, I think, was when there was a delegation that went to when the kings just died, the Huns, so a new delegation goes to the walls of Constantine, and there's two guys on a horse, and then the Byzantine, Eastern Roman congregation comes out to meet. That was Theodorus II. They come out to meet the two Huns, and there he's got Buddha and Attila. That's the first mention of Attila, actually, Buddha, in those sources of Priscus. And so, and back then it was the Huns negotiated on horseback, and it was because they were masters of horse riding, so they had the very skillful. They also it was deemed weak if you would get off horse and so the Constantine, Theodorus and his delegation all had to stay on their horses. It was like, no, what the Huns, if they would have got off the horses, then they would have got off the horses as well. But the whole negotiations was done on horseback, and Theodorus got really uncomfortable sitting on the horse because they weren't used to it compared to the Huns. And yeah, they went to negotiate the terms of, because there's a lot of escapees that escaped into Byzance, and they had a list of them, and they wanted them returned. They were like the criminals. They needed to be accountable for their crimes, and they escaped into the Byzantine Empire. So they had a list of those people they wanted Byzance to give them. They negotiating the taxes because Byzance was paying taxes to the Hun Empire. So that means they were servants to the Hun Empire. And there's a basic rule for the Huns that there'd be like a 5-day no man's land between the two kingdoms. It's like a barrier of a safety zone, just to if they were ever attacked, that they could prepare instead of beginning ambush. So it was just a house rule, one of the part of their rule that they enforced. And then many times the Byzantine and other nations or kings would disobey, and then the Huns would go in and clean them out, and then demand more taxes. So it was kind of a bit of a discipline action at times. And also there was another thing that I think there was listed when they went to Attila and Buddha about how the one of the Byzantine bishops have gone across to ransack and one of the graves of the Huns and steal a lot of the burial items. Like they would have buried their all kinds of things of value. Could have been goblets of gold or plates, because yeah. So they went there to kind of negotiate new terms and tell just negotiate. So that was the first mention of Attila with the Byzants. But yeah, so that was interesting. And then Priscus, about his visit to, I think I'm good with this date. It was around 348, I believe, because I just watched that, refreshed my memory just about a couple of hours ago. And how he goes there is first another delegation goes to Byzance, and there's this guy called Adeco, and see, that's where I forget the other guy's name. Anyway, two of them go, and the main character is Adeco anyway, that we have to remember. And he they go there again and they're negotiating terms, and Byzance by this time they can't beat Attila with an army, so they offer to the only other way is they're trying to, because they're masters at poisoning each other. They have a history of kings poisoning each other all the way through. They got a horrendous history of that. I remember they were kind of, a lot of times right up, they're always kind of not keeping their treaties or word, always breaking them. So not all, but a lot of the emperors. I remember constantly Hungary, the Magyars, the Huns are always at war with them. Even the Scythians, the Huns, the Avars, they're all the archery nations of Central Asia, and they all have a lot in common with their blood covenants, their culture, customs, and their burials. And that's another thing I'll talk about. The things they have in common. And Scythians are quite amazing history. And they had a lot of contact with the Greeks, about 500-600 BC right up. So there's a lot of writings about they have because Greece used to love debating and having philosophical debates. And there's some Scythian scholars also that moved to Greece and were debating with, and I'll get into that too later if we have time, if I remember. So the Byzantines had a gut full of Attila, and they want to try and negotiate or do something, or try and convince rather, because no one can get close to Attila only if it's a Hun. So they try and, because they knew Adeco had a kind of more of a barbaric past before he became one of Attila's close men, right-hand man actually. They go to him, look, they show him around the palace and the gardens, and they go, what do you think of this? It's beautiful. And they try and razzle-dazzle him with all the beauty of the palace. And they said, if he's interested, they'd be able to give him some of that, and then even 50 pounds of gold. And 50 pounds of gold is a lot of money back then. And they try to sway him. And Adeco is listening to the offer, and he goes, they supposedly convince him, that, and the Byzance guys get really excited, and they go, And they go, yeah, and Adeko goes, look, okay, we do this, but don't bring the money now, because they wanted to offer the money to him in that now. I said, no, we'll do that at a later stage. So the delegation head off, and so the Byzants send a delegation with the Deco and the I think it's Aristos, I think the other guy, and they go heading back to see Attila's kingdom. And Priscus says he was part of the delegation too. Priscus, that's the guy who wrote that 8 volumes, and he says it was amazing, the lands, like you wake up at dawn, the sun would be rising, and by the end of the day, all the twisting and turning through the valleys and hills and grasslands, you'd come to at the end of the day, you'd think it'd be very confusing. The sun be setting in the same place where you thought it was rising. It's kind of magical experience. And he also talks about that's another thing. Hopefully I remember that. Anyway, I'll get to that later. Yeah, so that's the one thing they say is they always talk about the Huns, like just living on horseback and tents and things like that. That they didn't have any buildings and cities, but they built a lot of timber with timber buildings, and obviously after thousands of years they decay. They're not like a stone building. So their building materials were different to like around Greece, because Greece and that they still have stone and that in Hungary, but a lot of it would have been like back then they had like oak forests and maple and tilia trees, and wood. If you travel through Europe, different areas would build different materials, right? Depending on what was their housing or what they got used to. And because they were more of a nomad, it was quicker for them to knock up a wooden house than a very skillful tradesman with woodworking. So Priscus is traveling, and a big storm hits. And they got tents because they're traveling, and so it's really windy, and they start panicking that the storm will kill them because of thunderstorm and winds. So the Huns offer them to go into their residence for protection until the storm passes. And he said the housing was they had normal housing. So that was another documentation that they did have housing, not just living in tents or yurts they call them, like the Mongols, And the thing is, again, the Huns and a lot of their burials, they're not even Mongoloid. They've got red and blue eyes and tall. So again, they describe the Huns as coming from Mongolia and Siberia, and a lot of the genetics and DNA testing they do has proven, archaeology has proven that more and more they discover they got nothing to do with Asian, like the Asian yellow skin, or they had a. So yeah, it's interesting. More Europoids or Caucasian looking than and they always talk about them being like short, bow-legged, and it's not like that. It's not like that. It's another stereotyping or misleading information about them. And so so they had all sizes as well, short, tall, medium. It was all over the place. So they couldn't. And the Huns were made up of many tribes. Because Attila would he would even take over the king. I mean, they fall under his kingdom, but the leader would still rule that group of people. They keep their language, their culture and customs, but they'd all be under the Hun Empire. So he never forced them to change their language or their culture or anything. That's why when the Hun Empire dispersed, a lot of the nations still were identified by their own group. But he had many. There's a list of them. You can research that. There's a whole bunch of nations that were underneath Attila. So anyway, so Priscus, they continue to see Attila's court. But what had happened was Attila demanded that all the escapees that were supposed to be handed back to the Hun Empire, they would not send any delegation or negotiation until they returned they had a list of who they had to return. So they arrived at Attila's court. While they were there, Attila kept postponing meeting them, and they were just about to give up and even head back to Byzance. Well, Deco had a talk to Attila, and they ended up seeing him in court. And then the Byzant group go, our Theodorus II wishes you all the best, the great king wishes you wealth and success and etc., all ass-licking stuff. And Attila in return goes, I wish the same, but in a very a little bit of an arrogant way. And he goes, how dare you even come visit, and where are the escapees? And he goes, we brought 17 of them, they're here with us. And he goes, but there's more, there's over, I think there was around about 28 or 30 of them. And he kept a really good administration. And even the two administrators that came to the court, they gave her the list of who the escapees were. And he said, these are the lists, and this has already been handed to you, so you haven't even kept your word with that. So I shouldn't even be talking to you, until that was the agreement we had. And actually, those two administrators were even Roman, from Rome. So again, he never discriminated against. So he had all kinds of people working in his court. It wasn't just Huns. And he also had this saying: he doesn't care where you come from, as long as you're good. So he wasn't. Yeah, and that's a reflection, and I'll get into that's actually a common thing with the Huns. They don't look at, for example, if you're German, back those days, if you're German, if you had one drop of German blood, you'd be able to identify yourself as a German. That's why a lot of times a ruler couldn't be a ruler or king unless you had German blood. That's why a lot of times the other kingdoms, surrounding kingdoms, would marry their daughters or other princes to have bloodline running through the family, so they can rule their kingdom, for example. And with the Jewish, it was you'd have to track the history of your mother, and then, for example, with the Jews, the only way you'd be identified as a Jew if your mother was Jew. So, and the children that were born, they'd never even look at the father. It was always through the mother. So again, it was both of them are materialistic. While the Huns had a different way. If you they didn't care where you come from, but if you were noble, you were a good person, you can become a Hun. So it was more, they looked at your soul and character, which is way more important. It was more like, and it's interesting the way they even did the blood covenants. I'll get into that after, but I'll get back to this Priscus and the court. So the Romans come out with the two Roman administrators come out with the list, and he goes to these guys. Look, half of you are going to stay here, and then the other half's going to go to Byzance and bring back the rest of the escapees. He gives them the list. So then, as the Byzantine guys leave the court, that's when the deco goes over and goes, now, next when you come back, that's the time to bring the money. And the guys get really excited, you know. So, they go to court, go back to not Greece. Well, it's Greece, I guess, or Byzance, and they go back, and the guy's so excited that they're gonna eventually kill Attila that he even brings his little son, to witness it. You know, that to have to kind of be proud of his father, that this will be part of history that he was there. So they go, they return, but he was that excited he actually, instead of bringing 50 pounds of gold, he bought 100 pounds of gold in a leather bag, and they're carrying it through the all back to Attila's court. A few weeks later, they arrive, and then they get surrounded by the Hun soldiers. Oh, actually, I forgot a really important point. Before they went back, Attila told them that on their return, they're not allowed to carry more money than that will pay for their, like, say, I'm just picking I'm assuming it would have been 2 or 3 weeks, roughly, about a week to get there, maybe a week to get back to it, by foot or soldier, by roads and horse, who knows, could have been longer. But anyway, so as long as they came, so to pay their accommodation and food, they can only bring that much money. That was it, and no more. That was part of the deal as well. So when they come back, they get surrounded by the Hun soldiers, and the Hun soldiers go to them, hey, look, they take him to court, and to the Hun court, and Attila goes, what's that in your neck, and they open it, and it's 100 pounds of gold. And then he yells at them and goes, didn't I tell you again, you guys don't know how to listen. We make a deal and you keep breaking it. He goes, I told you that you could not bring more money than to cover your trip, expenses. And then he gets so angry that he pulls the son to the side and threatens to execute him if he doesn't tell him what, because he can tell he was lying. He was making up all kinds of excuses why he bought the money. And then eventually he breaks the guy, and he confesses that the money wasn't for anything else but to pay a deco, to assassinate you. So he ends up, Attila ends up, getting the truth out of him. And then what happens is he goes, look, I'm going to send your son. No, I'll send you back to Byzance. You're going to double the money, so bring back 200 pounds. And then when you come back, I'll release your son, So that means he had to go back. But on the way back, one of the Hun delegates go with the Byzantine group, and when they go back to Byzance, the Hun goes to Theodorus II in his court, surrounded by all his fellow, courtmen, whoever they are. It's a huge room full of them. And he goes, do you recognise that leather bag? And Theodorus looks around and he goes, yes. And he goes, under the Hun leader, the scourge of God, I actually call it, in Hungary, we call it the whip of God, because he came to put order in the world. I forgot. I'm going to tell you. When I finish this, I'm going to tell you another interesting thing. But Alexander the Great. Anyway, so he goes, the world leader and the Hun king, so he belittles him. He ends up belittling Theodosius II in front of his whole court, that what he had done was the lowest of all, especially being a servant to the Hun because they pay taxes. That it was a very for a servant to even do that is the worst of all. So then he demanded the money, and he got the money, and then they even raised the taxes again. So they penalised them for that, and they went back to for the money, and then when they got back, Attila released the child, or kid back to. See, this is another interesting facet that everybody makes out Attila he was very diplomatic. He didn't go to war unless it was the last resort. He tried. Again, he had mercy on both of them. He could have. Any other king would have executed them if they knew that they came to kill him, or organise, or trying to organise his assassination. But he released them. And there's actually a very many examples of that about the Hun kings, like Attila. Like even during the Hungarian reign of Saint Stephen, Saint Laszlo, how they have mercy on the enemy. Even you see depicted on horseback when they turn around, on the horseback, they look at their enemy and goes, "Look, I'll spare your life. Just don't come after me. You're dead if you do." So again, they even in their art they depicted as like go or I'll knock you off. So there's another examples of that through history as well. So, and again, he never Rome and Byzance is never flattened by Attila. He never goes to destroy it. Well, the Gauls, the Goths, and the Vandals all do it. 3 or 4 times the Gauls have done it. Off the top of my head, I remember the Gauls 4 times totally flattened Rome, and they don't get any bad media, and the Huns do. So, and then you find later on, and it's interesting, the more I studied Hungarian history, the more I discovered who pulls the strings in the background. And it's pretty obvious after time. Even the ones who pull the strings now are the same characters who pull the strings back then. But back then it was easier to expose them. And there's a lot of even sayings Attila used to say, like the wolf may change his skin of his fur to look like a good guy, or like a shapeshift into something good, but he could never change his character. So he used to use that all the time. For a while, they might get away for a few years of acting the good guy, but in time, if they got that bad character, which they do to this day, they do, it'll always shine through their smoking mirrors, So yeah, it's a good example. And even when he went around Europe, like in Medina, he went there, and the king he went in to do diplomacy with. He said, "Who are you?" to the king, and he goes, "I'm a servant of God." And then actually he'd ask, "Verse, who are you?" "I'm Attila, the scourge of God, or the whip of God, to make order in this world." And then the other guy would go, "Well, I'll serve you, but if you're the God, then I'll serve you because you represent a higher than their kingdom." And then they absorb them into the kingdom, and then it'll be like, as I said, they keep the culture, the language, the king, and as long as there was one body, one soul, one heart, they'd all go into battle together. So it was made up of a lot of different kingdoms, and even Germanic tribes. It's funny when the because the Goths and Visigoths of Eastern Europe at the time, they already had encounters of the Huns, but the main documented one Because what happens is there's a lot of, like, you get some sources here or there and everywhere, but when you have to present a source like in a lecture or reinforce it in an argument, like teach it at a university level, a lot of professors will use literature or source. So it's been usually comes from minimum of three sources to be able to present it as a strong objective argument. And usually those sources don't come from the country. It has to come from the surrounding. For example, it might come from an Arab source, it might come from a German source, and it might come from maybe a Chinese source or Persian source. And then they read all three, and then they can compare the happenings, or even speak about the three, and then give you a rough idea of, because some might have been allies, the other one could have been enemies, or some could even be neutral, or later, and then they even try and collect information from the closest, and then they try and work out whether there was bias, because they have to look at all the political scene at the time as well. So it's quite interesting. But the first encounter, the Huns have, this is before Attila, I think it was 371. I think I had to hit that on the nail on the head too, that date, is when the Huns attacked the Goths. And the Goths were defeated in the battle, and news gets to the Visigoth king, their Germanic tribe. And the Visigoth, the king goes, he's mighty, and he'll challenge the Huns. So they go to the most eastern part of their empire, but it wasn't even an empire. They didn't even run it. The German tribes are fighting continuously with each other. They broke treaties. They were always they're very barbaric with each other. A lot of infighting, and that's why the Romans and Huns and other tribes could easily control them, because they were never united. They didn't unite right up until Prussia, right up in the 19th century, just before. They were always divided, and they made up a lot of different kingdoms all the time. Later in history as well. So they had a lot of infighting all the time. That's an interesting history, the German kingdoms. So so the Visigoth king rocks up to the eastern part of where just outside the Carpathian Mountains. Can't remember the name of that river, but anyway, they set up like a wagon. Back then they set like a wagon fortress. That's what I'm thinking of. So they built a wagon fortress, and then they use that like to have the soldiers in there while they could shoot them in and out, and it kind of gave them like some protection. And they also put their army against the river. But what they didn't realize is the Huns' main tactic was to swim across the river with their horses and hit them around the back, without them expecting it, So they use that tactic a lot of times, and it took the Europeans or the Western or the enemies a while to catch on to it, because they had a lot of very good strategy all the time, and they were always outnumbered. Most of the battles that were documented, the Huns were always, and the Magyars, and were always outnumbered, but they always won with pure tactics all the time. So they never feared, or being bullied by, that kind of stuff. So anyway, the Visigoths rock up. We'll go back to that battle scene with the river, and the Huns, on the crack of dawn, they swum their horses across, to the other side, and they surrounded them, and then the Visigoths woke up to a shower of arrows, and 2-3 hours later they were just about annihilated. But the Huns always used a tactic to leave a path for a group to escape, to spread the word of their just loss, and how and about the battle. So they ended up escaping, leaving this path, and I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how many escaped, but enough to spread the news. And then after that, there was a whole exodus of Goths who trampled onto Rome to try and get protection, and then they went all the way down to Spain and across to even Great Britain. A lot of them went across there, and they thought they'll be safe there, because Huns were, but the Huns were happy settled just outside of the Carpathian Basin at that time, near the North Black Sea, around that area. They only came in after Attila's period, just before Attila. They came into the Carpathian Basin, and then they set up their kingdom there. So, and the Romans were actually paying the Huns as mercenaries to fight put order against the German tribes, the Goths, all the time. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. So they already had contact, as again, it's all written, documented that the Hun, because the Romans saw how skillful the Huns were, and so they actually paid them to go in and do some sorting out, mercenary stuff. And yeah, so that was interesting part. What else I could mention? Yeah, they also had a blood covenant. Always the Scythians, Huns, Magyars, Avars, and they used to, for example, it was more like even one of the Scythian kings, not kings, sorry, scholars. He was discussing with a Greek. This is around 500-600 BC. Did write his name down? Yes, Tokaresim. I think that's his name, but I'm not sure. But he was a Scythian. It's easy to Scythian scholar. He went to Greece, and he used to have these big debates between the Greeks and the Greek scholars and the Scythian, and they compare, their wisdom. And one of them was he's getting into a debate with one of the Greek scholars. The Greek scholar goes to him. There's a few two good ones. There's one about he goes to the Scythian guy. I don't understand you Scythians. You talk about you teach your children history, of not even of your own people. You talk about two Greek heroes instead of your own people's heroes, And it's about these two Greek soldiers who have an issue with their boat, and it ends up going off course and goes into a Scythian part of the lands, and the Scythians capture them, and they take them back to their camp and take them as prisoners. And what happens is the two Greeks escape, and they're so skillful at escaping that they, as they're on horseback, one's blocking the arrows while the other one's fighting the Scythians off, and they end up escaping and being that skillful that they work their way back to the empire, and they even on the way they steal a few things as well from the Scythians and take them back, to Greece. So the Scythians actually teach this to the children, as well. It's not, and then the Scythian scholar goes to the Greeks. See, it's not about materialism. We teach our children. Doesn't matter where you come from. We teach if someone's good and skillful, we'll teach them for character building that the Greeks were, these two heroes of Greece actually were that skillful. So they didn't discriminate between they use examples not just of their people but other nations around them as well, which was interesting. And then he goes to the Greek guy. Just get a sip. He goes to the Greek scholar. Yeah, but we Scythians, we're not like the Greeks. We don't call people friends just because we live in the same street. We go to the same school. We drink together at the same bar. If we see someone who's noble or has a certain something I'm lacking and the other person's got, my friends, because together he'll see what he lacks, and then together we're complete. We make something complete. So we look at the character of the person instead of and then a lot of times another thing they used to do was say they bonded so well they'd even do a blood covenant with they get a glass of wine, red wine, well, who knows, could have been white wine. Wine, they cut their thumb, put blood in it, mix it with their sword, a knife, or then say a certain ritual or prayer over it. They drink it together, and then from that time on, because they had each other's blood in their body, they become like a brotherhood. It'd be like a testvérd. But the word, it's interesting. Testvérd in Hungarian means body, blood. Like and in English or Latin, all you have is brother or sister or sibling. So the words don't actually mean body, blood. While in the Hungarian language is very good at describing a lot of philosophy and teachings, a lot deeper than sometimes I have problems translating. So through these blood covenants, because of blood and love run through your heart. That's again a very important part of the Scythian and Hun teachings. The blood and heart are very important, and that's where love resides, is in your heart. So blood, if it flows through both of us, then it's it makes it into a testvérd or like a, and even later with they call it kormazás, and they used to do it Easter time. They used I think on just after Easter, on Easter Sunday or Easter Monday, they call it kormazás, and it was in the Moldavian Christian Hungarians did it. It was very common. They get an egg, like an egg, and then what they did was paint it red. And while the egg is white, it means it's kind of trapped in this world. But once it's red, it's released. So what they do is paint their eggs red, and then they hit it together, and then they eat it together. They smash them together, and the one that broke, they'd eat together. And then from that day on, they'd be like brother and sister. So even the families wouldn't be able to intermarry, because they'd be recognized as brother and sister. If I did that with if I had children, I did that with another guy, that means that his children and my children couldn't get married. They'd be like official blood relatives. So it's really interesting. So it was kind of a way of it's interesting because you look at and the Huns, Scythians, Magyars, because that's their ancestors of ours. They're all linked, and it's documented in a lot of areas. They also had this blood covenant, and it's so interesting that even Jesus had a blood covenant, and no other, and the Medes also, but there's not much. There's a lot of information lost on them, but they also had a blood covenant. I remember hearing at one of the lectures. And Jesus had this blood covenant as well. So it's interesting. They use the wine, the blood, but later later, even with the Huns, after Jesus' New Testament, they didn't need to use blood anymore. This is wine. It's interesting, and that's part of even the New Covenant, and even Saint Andrew, which is the main founder of the Orthodox Christians, used Saint Andrew, the Apostle. He travelled to Eastern Asia, Central Asia, I should say, and he taught the Scythian Empire. And then after that, he went to Greece, and that's where they actually executed him. The Greeks put him on the St. Andrew crosses because he didn't want to get, he didn't want to die like Jesus, like on the normal cross. He said, I'm not at the same level as Jesus because he's God. So wish to be executed a different way, you know. So they put him on the St. Andrew's cross, and a lot of I think it's Scottish have St. Andrew's cross. Or a lot of it's, as I said, it's linked to a lot of the Orthodox countries. If you do the Greek Orthodox teachings, and the Scythians are also the Dacians of the Black Sea, North Black Sea, which later come in contact with who are linked to the King Arthur culture, who are later the Sarmatians and Dacians. They were the ones who sent over to fight the Picts, and they sent 5,000-6,000 of the troops across horseback, and they're the ones who fight off the Picts, because the Picts are all foot soldiers, and because the Huns are so skillful with their horse riding and archery, they use them to put on the northern borders of the Roman Empire when they were in the UK. They were there to control the Picts, because they used to come down in big hordes. So that's where the King Arthur legends come from too, and the Holy Grail. Because the Grail, the chalice, is evident in all the Scythians, the Huns, and that's where they did blood covenants, through the chalice. And the sword culture is very big through the Huns and Scythians. Scythians had the really good metallurgy, and their swords were the longest in the Huns. And they were very skillful with swords. So they didn't just have archery, they had very good swordsman skills as well. And a lot of people don't teach that anyway. A lot of people don't, they just think that they were good with the bow and arrows. You know? But yeah, I've got another lecture with Hidan Choba, Dr. Hidan Choba. He goes through all the different weapons, and I might listen to that and do it, because that's got so much information just on the weaponry they used and tactics. Is interesting. So the blood covenant, that's what I mean. This is when I was studying the history, all the way through, the professors always talk about the blood, because because the archaeologists and professors, they talk about what they discover in their graves, in the Kurgans, you know, in around the Don River, they got the graves of the Scythian kings. It's supposed to be a big valley of them, and even the first archaeology, everybody thinks came from the pyramids, but it was St. Petersburg, 1715. Some peasants were taking some gold artifacts and stuff to the king, and he asked them where he's from, and they showed him it was a big valley, and that's where the first archaeological started, just diggings. And after that, and the Scythians were they had some beautiful gold, jewelry, pottery, plates. They were very, very good at metallurgy. And even, I remember archaeological friends, because we had the Celts, Romans, everyone in Hungary, and they were comparing the different metal quality of the swords. And they claimed that the metallurgy for the Celts and the Romans were not as good as the Huns and the Scythians. They had really high quality metallurgy back then. And another thing they had in common, the Huns and the Scythians, were they're not like a cauldron. They didn't use it for cooking. It was like these big urns, I think they call them, steel urns. And they find them around a lot. And they were more for some ceremonial purposes. I can't remember exactly. I remember, again, that was very common between the two. They had these urns. Yeah, so anyway, I've been talking for about an hour, but I thought that's a summary of Attila. And maybe what would be interesting is, yeah, they claim there's some stories about how he died, you know, and about Buddha. They claim he assassinated or he killed his own brother Buddha, but there's no written evidence. Again, it's made up by the Goths who just tried to make him out to be a murderer, but there's no. The Byzantines never wrote about it. They even wrote about meeting him. Byzantines don't write about it. Priscus or no one. About his wait, I've got to finish this too. This is really important. A lot of people don't realize Deco and Aristos, on the fall of Rome, the two last emperors of Rome, the four, were Romulus Augustus and Adica, I think that's how you pronounce it. And their two fathers, Adica's father was Deco, and Romulus Augustus' father was Aristus, and both of them were Attila's right-hand men. So it goes to show that Europe, after that, that's when all the new Latin languages started, like Italian, Spain, French, for example. And so actually, a lot of people say they came from Charlemagne, but it actually came from the Hun Empire afterwards, because this happened later. This happened because Attila died in 453, but afterwards, the Huns Choba king, he came into the Carpathian Basin where they got Transylvania now, and he continued there. And some of the Hun tribes moved a bit east, and then the Goths. That's when the Gauls went crazy and then sacked Rome. But even, as I said, Attila never sacked Rome. And even Pope Leo, because, as I said, the Hun Empire was made up of different people, languages and religions. And they even have evidence written that they sang Christian songs and had their own chronicles on Christian chronicles as well, or doctrine. And Pope Leo asked if they could settle in the northern part of Italy to grow the Christian population. But I said not all the Huns were Christian, because a lot of them converted later, you know, because Christianity is not, like, you think about it, the Vikings and a lot of northern Scandinavian countries didn't convert till 1,000 years, you know, 1,000 or 1,200 or some even later. So yeah, there's a lot of pagan groups still around all through Europe. Not everybody converted to Christianity. And they even had the Arianus religion. And then over Armenia, they had Mani. I think I spoke about him before. Manichaeism, which was, again, that could have easily, I think by then, by Attila's time, it was already weakened, and the Manichaeism had weakened. But that's a lot of that teaching is Freemason stuff. So something to remember. So, and then Attila, supposedly they buried him. They said he was buried under a river. They moved the water, buried him. He was in a steel, a silver, and a gold casket. You know, it's supposed to represent the different elements, and the water, and etc. But the other version, which is reinforced by Dr. Vodakibor and the others, was that he was actually buried in the side of a mountain. The Choba king, his son, said he had these the Taltosh are not shamans, because again the Taltosh are like they're usually people that get born with like a psychic ability, and they're the ones who usually be prophets to the king, and they work in realigning heaven with earth if it starts going out of tune. It's like they do all the fine tuning. A lot of them are born that way, and a lot of them don't even want to be, because usually they're born with an extra bone, because extra bones in their hands, or too many teeth or toes or somewhere, and they usually a little bit sick as well, or they have too much blood and they get nosebleeds as well. And these people are like they're like the psychics. They as well for the kings, and they usually have like a mystical horse, which they use for so it's very different to shaman. They always say the Huns were shaman, but it's not true. It's another crap version that we had shamans. The Taltosh are very different to a shaman. Anyway, Chobakide, if he doesn't know how to bury Attila, so he has a group of Taltoshes where he asks him, how should we bury him, And then the Taltoshes go away for a few days, and they trying to work out, between God and themselves, how the best way to bury the world king Attila, because that's how he was depicted, because he was such a for a lot of people a wise, good leader, of Europe. So he they go away, and then they come back to Chobakide or king, and they go to him. We're going to bury him in silver, gold, and steel, silver, gold kind of a casket, and nobody is allowed to know where it is buried. They can't be left in out of sight, so it's got to be out of sight. So what they do is they claim he was buried in the side of a hill somewhere, and then covered up with that's somewhere, could be anywhere within the Carpathian Basin. It's huge. So to this day nobody knows. Actually, there's one place up at northern Hungary I went to, and it's a hill. It's only, I don't know, maybe about 10 or 15 meters high, if that. And it's a mound. Everything's flat. And you just have this mound. It's got like a forest on it growing. And the people at village or town, it's a small village of about 100 or 150 people. You will say that's where Attila's buried. And I even remember talking at the time with a couple of lecturers, and they also said, yeah, that's where he's supposed to be buried. And I went for a drive there once. It's a little spot up in northern Hungary. And so, yeah, I don't know how genuine what it is, but they claim it is, so it's interesting. But Attila, yeah, he was loved by many. But as I said, people who write our history have twisted it. So keep an open mind on it. Another very interesting quick one. I've got to tell you this. It's very important. Alexander the Great is traveling through the Caucasus, near the Caucasus, and as he's traveling, he hears this big rumble of noise coming from through the gorge. There's a huge gorge between the mountains. And then the merchants are traveling with him, because they travel through that area all the time, answer, because Alexander goes, what's that noise? And the merchants say, beyond those gorge and mountains live the Huns, the Mogok and Gogok. And when the world has become so chaotic, and people have become so sinister and sinful, the Huns will break through these gates and put order in the world. And they even ends up in the book of Revelation, the four horsemen, and they're all horsemen, so it's interesting. So the Mogok and Gogok, and the Arabs and Jews write about him too, but there again, you know who they are. They're usually not the right ones to write about history. They're the ones who always, that's what the mainstream versions are now. But the Georgians, the Georgians and all that write about this as well, the Caucasus Gates. And anyway, Alexander the Great ends up building a huge steel gate, and he gets supposedly that's a legend of it, and it's supposedly be guarded, you know, to stop the Huns from breaking through there, you know. So yeah, they call it the Caucasus Gates. And even in our poetry, Odiondri, he writes about the gates of knocking of the gates before Kopoghash, you know, that the Huns are the ancestors. So yeah, it's all come through in our artwork, our literature, poetry, customs. So customary law is really important for us Hungarians, because customary law is more important than actually written law. The written law only started after the French Revolution. Before that, and then it was, let me see, yeah, like we had the same Cardinal doctrine, and no written constitution but historical constitution, which UK also had, and USA had half. And the written constitution only came in after the French Revolution. A lot of people don't know that. From the Age of Enlightenment occurred, where they claim that God had covered, up until then, God had covered man's eyes and from the truth, and it was up to man from then on to write the truth and use ration. That's when they brought the civil code in. So from then on, everybody, you can see the growth of the man's laws and then the destruction of God's laws. And what we had right up until 1940, 44, 45, before the communists come in. That's again, the communists had to destroy it. So we had customary laws, which would say if we couldn't sort it out with the lower house and the upper house would introduce the customary laws. So we had a combination of written laws, customary laws, and the St. Cardinal doctrine, and the Adam Bulla, I think I mentioned it before, the Golden Bull. And that was for the citizens of the country and the nobles together. Like a lot of people don't know the Magna Carta and a lot of others were only for like 20 or 30 noblemen for the Magna Carta. It wasn't for the citizens, it was for the noblemen there. And I think I mentioned before, the Huns could easily lose their nobility if they broke the customary laws. It was more, even with the Scythians and the Huns, breaking customary law was more, you get a bigger penalty than because it was so important to keep the truth of the ancestors, because what was true to and that's again with the Hungarian language, you can go back 7 fathers, and every father has a different name, while in Latin, in the new Latin language, and even English, you only got you got father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, great-great-great. So you just put great on it all the time. So that means that you can go back 7 generations. So what was true to all my fathers, and the 7 fathers, true to me. So that's why it's interesting concept. And I can talk for hours. I just got all these thoughts coming to me now, but look, I'll finish it up. But yeah, that's pretty much interesting little versions of the Huns. So guys, don't be intimidated or think. Trouble is that in English it's very difficult to get good sources. I really struggle. And don't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia, anybody can write into that. It's just rotten. Sometimes occasionally I check it, and very rarely I find good information in there. Most of the time it's anybody can write any history in there. It's such a mishmash of info. So if you want to do research, you have to do the hard yards. And don't get it through movies. Don't get it through computer games, because even there's a lot of these, YouTube channels, historical channels. They, I think Age of Thrones or something Thrones. They got a lot of these computer games and stuff, and even there, all the history is twisted, so twisted, and it's done for a purpose. It's there to brainwash and indoctrinate. A lot of people are too lazy, and they go, oh yeah, I saw it in a movie, and everybody always uses a movie, or even for religious purposes, they use movies which, again, Hollywood makes them, and we know who runs damn Hollywood. Do not be very careful of anything that comes out of Hollywood, because especially even yeah, I can talk for ages about things about those boys, those Yiddish people, the ones who have stolen our history and that rewrote our history, and whoever controls the medium. Actually, I was going to mention here. Yeah. Today's laws have no value as majority determine. That's the thing with the French. With the since the French Revolution, they use it to bring in democracy. Today's laws have no value as majority determine it, and who make the majority and create the majority is the media. So the media is the one who brainwash people to become the majority, and that's what we have today. People can't even think anymore. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now, guys. So it's been a pleasure talking to everyone. Hopefully you found some of the information interesting. It's thought-provoking, no doubt, but I think it's crucial, everybody, just to keep an open mind. We're not too open where your brain falls out. You have to have boundaries, and you have to have you got to decipher good from evil, and you can't. And if you want to learn history, you have to learn antiquity, Middle Ages, Renaissance, French Revolution, right up, because if you miss any of those parts, you don't get the full picture. And you've got to learn religion as well, and the meaning behind a lot of the. That's what I find. I found the Catholic teaching a little bit deeper, because you can find out a lot more about. They teach a lot more deeper teachings on, like the experience of the saints, the mass. But it's more the way the mass is conducted. There's a lot of the masses of the after Reformation, they get diluted. Just again, it's a man talking there, and a lot of the rituals of the original mass are lost. They're not taught. It's just a guy getting up there talking about just trying to razzle dazzle everyone, and there's all the important parts of the mass are left out, which was taught by Jesus, during his Last Supper. It's the most important part, and taking the body of Christ as the is really important. But they don't teach it in those. But I think it's very important, because if you know that and learn history, then you can join the dots and the whole puzzle of what today's chaos you can render and start making sense of. And if you don't do that, you're just banging your head against the wall. So don't be scared of Christianity. At first, I kind of hesitated, because I didn't know much about it, but after a while, it starts making sense. And don't be fear it. If you can learn other religions, the most beautiful philosophy in the world, which is all about love and not about me and self-centeredness, is learning Christianity, because that's all about God's love, not self-love. And that's the key. When you learn that, That's a key. The way it flows through you. It's not in you. It's got to flow through you, and you have to have grace for it to flow through you. If you've got a corrupted soul, it's not going to flow through you. So you have to get your, when I say SHIT together, before you can start experiencing having transcendental metaphysical experiences. Because if you got a heart of stone, God's not going to help you. Only the demons will. And the demons also have power. And if you give energy and love to awful things, you'll let that grow in the world. If you give energy to love, love the good things, then, and that's what heaven's about. That's where we all have to go, and nothing bad resides there. So food for thought. Have faith, and Christian faith is kick ass. Anyway, God bless. Have a good night, guys.